Good evening, everyone tuning in from Hong Kong, and good morning to everyone else tuning in from overseas. Tonight's FCC talk is about Belt and Road at a Crossroads. I'm sure that will be a scintillating talk, but before we get on the path to discussing what's next for Xi Jinping's signature project, just a bit of housekeeping. If you'd like to send any questions to our panelists this evening, please send an email to question@fcchk.org. That's question@fcchk.org. Now we are fortunate and honored to have with us three excellent speakers. We have Professor Jonathan Hillman. He is a senior fellow with the economics program of the Center for Strategic International Studies. He is also the director of the Reconnecting Asia Project, one of the most comprehensive open source databases for tracking Belt and Road. Prior to that, he was a policy advisor at the Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, a Fulbright Scholar, and a graduate of Harvard Kennedy School. His latest book is The Emperor's New Road, China and the Project of the Century. He's also writing another book on the digital Silk Road, which we hotly anticipate. We also have with us Dr. Nargis Kassenova. She is a senior fellow at the Davis Center for Russian and Eurasian Studies at Harvard University. She has a PhD in International Cooperation Studies from Nagoya University. As a professor at Kimep University in Almaty, Kazakhstan, she launched the Central Asian Studies Center as well as the China and Central Asia Studies Center. She specializes in Eurasian and Central Asian politics. And last but not least, we have with us in Hong Kong, Dr. James Wang, the research director of the Bay Area Hong Kong Center, Belt and Road Hong Kong Center. He studied economics at Renmin University of China, received a master's degree in geography from the University of Hong Kong, and PhD from the University of Toronto. As a transport geographer and port city development specialist, he has published widely in international journals and provided his expertise in research or consulting works for more than 40 projects in various cities in China and abroad. And here moderating this talk is Wall Street Journal reporter Dan Strumpf and my fellow board governor at the FCC. Please enjoy.
All right, great. Thanks a lot, Christine, for that introduction. And thank you all to the panelists for joining us this evening here in Hong Kong. So let's get right to it. Yeah, you know, I think perhaps it might be best to start this discussion on kind of a higher level. And just thinking broadly about, you know, sort of the success and failure of the Belt and Road 8 years after it was launched in 2013. Maybe John, why don't we start with you? I mean, you spent some time traveling across sort of, you know, many of the different countries that China has invested in as part of its Belt and Road initiative. You just published a book on this topic. Why don't you give us an idea for kind of what you learned on your trips, and your sense for you know, the ways in which the Belt and Road has worked, the ways in which it hasn't worked, and a sort of a high level take on all of that.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks for convening this. I think it's a really interesting time to be discussing this topic, and it's interesting too. You know, almost 8 years into this effort, you know, Belt and Road being announced in late 2013, that we're still kind of discussing some pretty fundamental questions about what is this, what is it trying to do, you know, what's the actual impact on the ground, and I think, you know, the reality is that the Belt and Road as it was announced in 2013 is not the Belt and Road as it is today. I think there were a whole set of initial objectives that it had, some of which you might think of as being more domestically oriented, things like wanting to help China address its excess capacity challenges, to help it rebalance growth, you know, to correct some regional inequality within China. You know, this, I think it picked up even more objectives, if not every week, then certainly every month after it was announced. People were talking about this as a way of internationalizing China's currency. They were, you know, and then there's a whole set of broader foreign policy implications that come with this set of activities. And what I've learned by looking at a lot of individual projects, I really do think you have to look at this as almost a project by project basis. And as you mentioned, doing some travel to different parts of the world where these projects are happening back when travel was possible, is that there's a really wide variety of experiences going on. And I think we need to look at local context to understand those experiences. I'm very hesitant to make any grand generalizations about this because now we have almost 140 countries participating in it. And so, it's really, I would be hesitant to do that, but I think we are seeing some lessons come to the front here. And among those lessons are countries with stronger institutions and sort of in more technical capacity, I think, tend to do better in choosing the right projects and then making sure that those projects are actually successful. So really basic things like having a development strategy and having projects fit into that strategy, that's not done everywhere. Some of these projects are unsolicited. Some of them happen without transparency. Some of them happen without the level of scrutiny that they should. And so I think that's been a really important lesson, is the importance of domestic institutions in partner countries where these projects are happening. I also think, and I talk about this a lot in the book, China is in many ways following in the footsteps of many of its great power predecessors. And we shouldn't be surprised that it's been encountering some difficulties. Doing large projects anywhere, including within your own country, is really difficult. They tend to take longer than expected, cost more than expected, deliver fewer benefits than expected. And China is doing this in some very difficult business environments. And with a whole bunch of additional challenges that come with being a foreign power doing projects in other countries. And so I think it's starting to learn some of the lessons that its predecessors learned, and that actually drove those predecessors to create things like the World Bank, where they could share financial and reputational risk. And so I think that there's that learning experience that's going on here. And so I think of the Belt and Road, the first 8 years, less as the domination of China and more of it, the education of China on the global stage.
Yeah, great points. Nargis, I'd love to turn to you and kind of get a little bit of perspective on, sort of the area of expertise that you focus on, which is Central Asia, which is of course a major focus of the Belt and Road, and has kind of its own story to tell, I think, as a handful of countries that have been, a major focus of Beijing on this. Why don't you kind of give us an idea for what you've seen in the part of the world that you study?
Yes, well, Central Asia is quite central, but it's central for the Eurasia land bridge for this project. But it's one of the regions where obviously where China is involved and is fostering this. What have we seen? What have we seen in Central Asia over the past 8 years? Well, first, I think it's important to note that in terms of fostering connectivity, all these elements had been already in place prior to 2013. So we had already railway connections, we had roads, we had big highway, the Western Europe, Western China highway connecting us. We already had some logistic hubs planned and constructed. For example, the signature project that we have, Horgoz Eastern Gate project on the China-Kazakhstan border, it basically was launched in 2011. So it was like really before the BRI was announced in 2013. All the energy infrastructure, major energy infrastructure projects were already in place. We had the oil pipeline connecting us, the gas pipeline connecting Central Asia with China. There were already big concession loans, and that's what we saw in the aftermath of the financial crisis. So basically that would be the second decade of the 2000s. So basically all these big components were already in place. But with the announcement of the BRI, it received this kind of the higher status, and it was not just connectivity, kind of China Central Asia connectivity, but we became part of this bigger global project. promoted by China, and Central Asian governments were quite happy to join that, to be part of that, and that seemed to promise more investments, more money, more support, and kind of this participation in big international fora, which our newly newly independent states also appreciate very much. So the promise was there and was partially realized, although given that we already had all these larger projects, started or even completed prior to 2013, we actually saw the decrease in the volume of money that was going to the region. But at the same time, we've seen the diversification of international cooperation, diversification and deepening of cooperation. So basically what I guess I'm trying to say is that the BRI in Central Asia was not something new. It was really drawing on what had been done prior to that, but it gave it more status, and it kind of also gave it a bit of a boost. But as Jonathan already pointed out, the kind of the more China was doing, the more it was encountering kind of the local content, the local environment, and sort of like more complications arose along the way, and China has been learning how to deal with it.
Great. James, let's turn to you for a little bit of perspective on kind of what you've learned based on the experiences of the Chinese companies that are actually so crucial to this BRI effort. I mean, I think what often maybe gets lost is that these are actual corporations that are often on the ground carrying out a lot of these investments on the ground. You have some familiarity with a few of these companies. I mean, what have you kind of learned? Do these companies actually make money on these projects? Are they in a strong position when they actually arrive to undertake some of these projects? What can you share about that?
Thanks, Dan. I think since 2018, I started to look in the Belt and Road Initiative stuff, and went to several countries as well. Not as many as Jonathan's gone, but at least I got a chance to see some of the operators, the real, I call it agent, because before that, if we count like 3 years ago, most of the literature is about how in general, we see the big data, or we see the total investment, and then some evaluation based on that. But I really think the real thing is how each individual project carried out by different agent, or what kind of company we're talking about. And then I look into some of these companies as well as some general data. And then I realized that maybe we can divide them into 3 categories. The first categories are those state-owned enterprises that go there, they construct some kind of a Belt and Road project, and then they come back to China. And when the construction is completed, that's for good to them. So do they make money? Yes. The reasons that quite often the money is actually paid from China's side. It's kind of a loan, right? So they complete that just like they complete a project somewhere in China. In that sense, I think they have nothing to lose. They don't have a big risk if there's anything that really serious, that is that they may face some, like John mentioned, they face some difficulties that they otherwise won't face in different countries. So that's one category. Then the second category is also state-owned enterprises, SOEs, but they have to be there much longer, like China merchants. They build a port, build a terminal, and then they need to run it. And if they lose the sense of business, and then they lose the whole thing. So this is very important because when you talk about making money or talking about how to share the risk, this company, this kind of a company, even they are state-owned enterprises, they have to be there, and the risk is together with local government or the country they stay in. So that means they have to share the risk. If the risk is there, it's there. They have to face that. And also, I think the other thing about this category is that they have a dual goal to achieve. On the one hand, they are so-called son of the central government, or China, son of the state. And then so they go out for carrying out the political initiative to make the task done, ordered from the central government. On the other hand, they also the operator and actually a business corporation which listed somewhere in China or in Hong Kong. As a listed company, you have to be responsible to your shareholders. So you have to do something like we call it profit maximization. So that means you have to do a dual goal, political one and a business one. And this is the second category. So they have much higher risk. And if they can do it carefully, the most important thing is positioning themselves right in the right country. And they have to convince the central government as well, why I'm here, why I'm not in another country. So if we trace back to the initiative or the Belt and Road, the Belt, that is the road that's on the sea, right? That all the points actually are somewhere in China merchant place, which is already invested. So again, this is how the government or the state have something to do with their state-owned enterprises. They have to work together to work out the whole initiative from the very beginning, even earlier than that. This third category, I would say, normally not considered by many of the researchers or whatever, put them in there as private companies. They go to those countries we call Belt and Road countries. They go there because they want to take advantage of this initiative. That means they will present to the central government, we are doing something, for the country, for whatever. At the same time, they diversify their risk of investment. They just like many other firms, they go abroad and then they find a different market. And of course, the risk is high, but at the same time, when I look at the data and I find that this type of companies, they are highly concentrated in some countries, I call it. These countries have three conditions. One is they are relatively more competitive in their own. They don't go to the very poor country in terms of economy. The second thing is they have a certain level of trade with China. So that means that there's chance for them to, be like a liaison or whatever role to play between China and that country. The third is usually these countries have a very good transportation accessibility with China so that they are easier to do the trade or to establish something in relation with their home business.
So, I want to turn to kind of the biggest criticism that the Belt and Road often gets, which is that it's a debt trap. And there's all kinds of examples that often get cited for this. Perhaps the example in Sri Lanka is one that's often cited. I know, John, you spent some time researching the situation with the port in Sri Lanka. I think, James, as well, you have some experience there too. How fair is this criticism that that Belt and Road projects are just debt traps, that they're a way to kind of for China and Chinese companies to own infrastructure in other companies and exert influence there? Maybe, John, if you want to, feel free to maybe start with that one.
Sure. So I think I mean, this set of issues, debt sustainability issues, are front and center right now. As a lot of countries, last year over 100 countries went to the IMF for debt relief. China, for most of them, is their largest bilateral official creditor. That doesn't mean that China is solely responsible for all of their debt issues, but it plays a major role in trying to figure out what to do now. And China's role as a lender has really grown dramatically over the last 2 decades. And during that time, this is where I think there are grounds for criticism about lending behavior. During that time, China has decided not to join the Paris Club, which is, a group of countries that subscribe to international standards for their lending practices. Includes things like disclosing, increased transparency around your lending, and doing assessments up front to try to minimize some of these debt risks. I think we've seen, especially during the Belt and Road boom years, 2016, 2017, when activity was pretty high, there was such a desire to go out and support this effort, I think, from some of the entities that are doing the lending, especially China Development Bank, China Exim, that there was a willingness to support projects that shouldn't have been supported. And sometimes at terms that were not, realistic for the countries that were borrowing. So I think that there is, ground for criticism there. And one of the challenges, frankly, has been that as countries are now trying to do some renegotiations and get some of these debt issues under control, they're not dealing with a unified, monolith China here. They're dealing with a whole bunch of actors on the Chinese side. So they're dealing with different commercial and state banks. They're dealing with state-owned enterprises. They're dealing with representatives from the Chinese government. And so it's been fragmented, and that's been a real difficulty in understanding exactly how much countries owe and how to begin to resolve this. But I think that fragmentation also makes it highly unlikely that this idea that China has been strategically driving debt levels up in recipient countries so that it can seize assets, I think that fragmentation of these activities makes that highly implausible. It's possible that Chinese officials might have considered, what they might want to do if a country were to, be in a position where it couldn't pay back its loans. But I find it less likely that they set out to create those conditions to take strategic assets. There's been very little evidence of asset seizure with countries participating in the Belt and Road Initiative. It's much more likely that debt is often deferred, debt payments are deferred, which is why I think, unfortunately, this set of issues is going to return probably several times for many of the countries that have been really big borrowers. But so the fragmentation is, I think, an important part of this to understand. In Sri Lanka's case, which you mentioned, I think the other part of Sri Lanka's experience that this highlights is that, as I was trying to mention at the beginning, I think it's really important to understand the local dynamics, the domestic politics of some of the countries that are participating in this effort. You need not only a borrower willing to lend money for projects, but you also need a critical mass of domestic political will to get these projects moving forward. And so in Sri Lanka's case, you had a president who was very willing to pursue projects that were dubious commercially. And so the port in Hambantota gets the most attention, but there's also an airport nearby and a cricket stadium nearby. And what all three have in common is they're all named after the president at the time, Mahinda Rajapaksa, and all now very little used. And so I think the debt trap narrative to some extent overlooks the agency of the countries that are participating in this. And so that's also an area in which some of these solutions reside. If we're going to fix debt sustainability issues, China, I think, needs to step up. There's a set of international best practices that it can adopt. It can increase transparency around lending, but we also need to have recipient countries, be their own best advocates here and make decisions that are not, just a sort of short-term political play but are in the best long-term economic interests of their countries.
Nargis, what do you think about the sort of ability of smaller states in particular to their ability to kind of leverage their position with China vis-a-vis kind of extracting beneficial terms in the deals that they need? I mean, there's a whole range of countries here. What can you sort of say about kind of the ability of smaller countries to sort of participate in a way that's to their advantage?
Well, first a little bit on the death threat. So basically in Central Asia, there are two countries that are considered at risk in this regard. That's Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, and both owe more than 1 billion to China's Exim Bank, and that's half of the Tajik foreign debt, and it's about 40% of the Kyrgyz foreign debt. And now, due to COVID and the economic crisis caused by the pandemic, both countries have a problem with servicing this debt. Although Tajikistan managed to get a deferral from China, while Kyrgyzstan is still, I think, they're still negotiating. And in a way, it's interesting why one country managed to achieve an agreement with Beijing, while Kyrgyzstan is finding it more difficult, and that's linked to local politics as well. But I agree that it's not a conscious kind of that's not Beijing trying to entrap these countries. There is a lot of kind of these loans were sought after by local governments who wanted to have these infrastructure projects happen. And there is a lot of agency, obviously, on our side, on this side of small states. They propose these projects, they try to push for these projects, they use the kind of or the circumstances, kind of the upcoming big summit or something, that would kind of allow to announce this big loan, big project, and China goes along with it. So there is definitely that. I would say the transparency in our case, in case of Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, is not so much an issue. There is a lot of information about these loans. In case of Turkmenistan, there is no transparency. We know that it owes billions and billions, but we don't know anything else. We don't know the exact amount, and like what the conditions are, and so on, so forth. There is leverage on both sides, and there are multiple actors. There are also Chinese companies who want to carry out this project, so they try to exert influence, and yeah, it's fairly complex game.
James, where do you fall on the debt trap question? What and are there upsides? Are there more upsides here than perhaps downsides to some of these projects?
Sure. First of all, I think I agree with John when mentioning that there are also, Nargis mentioned there are multiple players in the game. So it's not only the government. You cannot just say China is China. China has so many different agents playing in this game. Like the bank has their own view about the risk, not necessarily the central government. I have a very close friend who is deputy director or general manager of a top state bank in China, and he in 2014 he led a team to Africa because his bank got a task to cover the whole continent, and he said, I was not very lucky to cover Africa, but not Europe. Some other bank got that job. And then after 200 some days in Africa, traveling like dozens of times between China and Africa, eventually this bank only funded 2 projects both of them are run by Chinese companies in Africa. I asked him why you don't even have a single project assigned with the local government, any state government. He just told me that's the first and most important risk we are facing in that part of the world. And because of the unstable regime, if the regime change, everything's gone. So the trap is to the Chinese banks. So that means that only, after years, and then only those projects, really there are the trusted local government in, at least no matter it's transparency there or not, but at least they trust each other and they think that is the opportunity. But even, saying that, like the Hamilton case, Jonathan just mentioned, the former president's name there everywhere. One of the reasons, of course, is because that is his hometown. The same thing happened in Oman when the second biggest city or the biggest port in Oman is the hometown of the president of the country. So it is kind of a similarity there, and someone else want to do that, and eventually he stepped down, and the whole thing changed, and the local atmosphere changed, and then China was asked to send a team or to send a company. Actually, they pick up by the Sri Lankan side from two of the Chinese companies. China Merchant was the one picked and start to operate that port. But another thing, I think Jonathan also almost mentioned, that is the decision made is not necessarily political or financially feasible, because I'm an expert on port development. So I see that Sri Lanka has two major ports if we consider Hambantota, the second one. The biggest one or the most successful one is Colombo, which is the gateway and transshipment port for the entire Indian peninsula, because there are two countries, India and Bangladesh. They need to have something exporting to other part of the world, and they don't have deep sea port. So this is the ideal location. So China Merchant has been very successful in that, but when they got the second one, they have to differentiate the two ports. And then they stop there. They have to find something new, find something that they can sustain this place. This is very, very difficult. So who's going to be trapped? In my view, this is the company which trapped there. They got 99 years to run, but in my view, in the first 2 decades, if they fail forever. So this is the situation. It's very difficult. So for that particular company to revitalize that place, because it came with the very initial, probably not so smart decision made by the president at that time. So you see that I totally agree with two of you to say that the problems vary from one country to another. So we cannot say this is the typical thing to everywhere else. Even I don't think it's a trap, but it's still not the same thing to things happen to, say, Central Asia.
Your story reminds me of the saying in finance, which is that if you owe the bank $1 million, that's your problem. But if you owe the bank $1 billion, that's the bank's problem. So it's sort of a way of kind of just sort of saying that it's, yeah, I mean, to your point about how, sometimes companies can be trapped in a way as well. And actually on that point, we have a question from a member, Christopher Page. And Christopher asks, is the debt load that's being created likely to give rise to a new debt crisis, a less developed country debt crisis, similar to what we've seen in previous national debt crises in South America, perhaps Southeast Asia? Within China, is there a risk of a debt problem from failed projects? I don't know who wants to you know, who wants to take that question? But perhaps James, if you want to offer your thoughts.
Well, let me give you an example again. For example, Laos. China built a railway there from north to south, going through the entire Laos country. It actually is the first railway, the real serious one. They had, before China doing this, they had only 3 kilometers of railway, basically, which is nothing. And then this railway caused a huge, although, you know, in Chinese mind, it's not big, but to a very poor country, just started its economy takeoff. It's a big chunk of investment. They need to pay back, and then what they can do is to pay back by agricultural products, fruits, or everything's from the earth. So this is going to be very long period of time, right? And China decided to do this. I think China knows there's going to be huge, very long payback period. But to China, this is what they want to do, and to that country, they don't mind to pay something like this back to China. The good thing in that way to say they don't have the inflation consideration, because they just pay not by cash, not by money, but by the real products. That's a very, very unusual case that they don't even need to worry about this, but it's going to be something that you have to have a very tight and long, good relationship with China. Otherwise, China will not allow this kind of deal going on. So with other countries, maybe that's not the case. But on the other hand, when you say, I don't know if that was part of question, that the risk China is taking, I think not many outsiders, outside China, knows that there are a lot of kind of discussions why this country is paying so much to Belt and Road rather than paying it to somewhere in China for the poor, somewhere here and there, more than just go, throw away the money to some other countries outside China. So the pressure is there to China to explain to the central government when we talk about transparency, and this is a big money spent outside China. Can we get the money back when China postpone the payback, the interest? And then again, some people in China to say, are we doing this foreign aid, not a loan? This is a very different situation. Are we giving away all the money we already use the term investment? We invest there, we expect the money coming back, but now it seems that they never will come back. So this is a pressure from China, but I don't think this amount of total will cause problem within China. China is still quite strong in that sense. That means China is now trying every way to dig in their own so-called internal circle. That means they trying to boom or stimulate the consumption within the country in order to sustain.
So, I think this is probably a good time to segue to, the topic of the pandemic that we're in at the moment, and what's the impact of the pandemic been on the Belt and Road, China's ability to carry out Belt and Road projects, and the types of projects that are being carried out. And actually, on this point, we have a great question from a viewer, Dr. Matthias Bach, who asks whether or not vaccines might actually become the next hotspot in the geopolitical tussle between China and the West. And I would add to that question, whether or not vaccines are perhaps will be somehow incorporated into Belt and Road projects, or will be sort of part of the part of these initiatives. So, yeah, who wants to take that question? Nargis, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, the impact of the pandemic on BRI in Central Asia has been mixed. On the kind of on the positive side, the volume of container freight increased due to disruptions of sea freight and also air. So we did see an increase in last year in 2021, and seems like the dynamic continues. Although now for the past several months there have been problems due to the quarantine imposed by the Chinese side. So there are some containers blocked at the border. The quarantine also affects the transit of goods by trucks. So it's sort of kind of mixed. Number of projects continue to be implemented. Some are suspended. So overall, we don't know what will be the kind of the impact, what we will see this year and next year in terms of vaccine diplomacy. So far, the Russian vaccine kind of is stronger in the region. I think only Uzbekistan, maybe also Turkmenistan, but Uzbekistan for sure, they're using both Russian and Chinese vaccine, and they were also participating in the testing of the Chinese vaccine. So we'll see what's going to happen. There was obviously the kind of the, how do you call it, the diplomacy effort, linked to the provision of medical aid and PPI and all that was rather successful. People do know about this aid provided by China, and we are sort of in the Russian information space, and in the Russian information space, kind of the information about kind of China and the way they managed the pandemic is kind of than what we see in the West. So let's see. There is this half Silk Road that is kind of now being pushed and got the momentum, although it did precede the pandemic. So we'll see. I think they kind of it's not entirely clear how it will play out.
John, I'm seeing you want to chime in here. What do you think?
Thanks. So I think as Nargis is mentioning, the Health Silk Road, technically predates the pandemic, but I think the pandemic also shows how the Belt and Road continues to evolve to meet, the needs of the time. That's one of the main advantages of not having put forward a really strict criteria in the first place for what even qualifies as a Belt and Road project. I personally think the downsides outweigh the upsides on that, because it's made this near impossible to manage. But you now see one of, the upsides in that the Health Silk Road has become a much more prominent part of this set of activities, especially in the messaging around these activities. I think there was a policy document in 2015 that had a whole bunch of, it called for policy coordination between China and countries participating in the Belt and Road across a whole long list of issues. I think health issues got about a paragraph in that 16-page document. One of the objectives was actually, we should share information to prevent the outbreak of, pandemics. I think we can say that objective was not accomplished. There hadn't really been much of a hard health infrastructure component to the Belt and Road. And I think that's primarily because there just wasn't as strong of a domestic interest within China to push that out. So China has 7 of the world's 10 largest construction companies. They were very eager to go and build transport and energy projects, 2 sectors where they're very competitive. There wasn't, that set of health actors. And so you see some scattered projects in the earlier years that have some relation to health, but really no coherent overall health Silk Road. But then you see, this is now a higher priority. The vaccine is a real carrot. I mean, and during a pandemic to have a vaccine is about as strong of a carrot as you could have. But I'm also struck by some of the similarities between how China has done large infrastructure projects, rolling them out very fast. That's one of their sort of comparative advantages, is to move faster, to not do as much of the slower, longer safeguards up front. That can be very appealing for recipient countries if you're on a political timeline, a willingness to build to budget. And so you see this vaccine being rolled out very fast with some questions about data and transparency. That could, the upside could be significant if it works, but if it doesn't, there is a huge risk there.
James, is there a chance for a health Silk Road to sort of take shape over the next couple of years? What is the potential for the vaccines to be a sort of carrot for Chinese projects, as John mentioned?
I think, first of all, personally, I think this vaccine stuff should not be politicized, but actually the reality is not. I think if we look back, the UK and the USA, they suffered seriously at the very beginning when the pandemic set in. And then China, on the other hand, except for the first few months later on, China became, totally controlled the situation, and everything's fine. But then when the vaccine set in, the situation's just opposite. Chinese people do not see the importance of vaccine. Rather than, the British, we have the information. More than half of the British people got vaccinated. And this is a totally different story. After a few months from now, we'll see some Western countries, they can go out and travel. But on the other hand, how many Chinese people, what a percentage of Chinese people got vaccinated by the end of this year, maybe less in total percentage than some Western countries. So this is going to reverse the current situation. And then China, by that time, if from now to then, if China keep exporting a lot of vaccine now to as a foreign aid to developing countries, it sounds a very good kind of a scenario. But at the same time, I think China need vaccine itself a lot, not enough now. So I think China is a little bit struggling here to see, in future, what is going to be a political strategy using vaccine as a mean to accomplish that task is going to be very difficult. So I think it's not going to be a very easy solution to China to do that. But on the other hand, I think it's been a tradition that China, for example, sending doctors to developing countries, like a team of doctors to Cambodia. Even our center organized last year and the year before to send doctors to Cambodia, to Laos now, to do some kind of a work to set up a harmony relationship between China and these countries. I think vaccine can definitely be playing that kind of role.
Nargis, I just want to ask you something that you touched on a little bit earlier, which was that you've got sort of it sounds like Russia and China sort of competing in Central Asia to in the vaccine space has sort of emerged as kind of this battleground for vaccinations. I mean, can you tell us a little bit more about what you've learned about that, and you know, who's winning in terms of adoption, which side?
Well, I don't think they do it to compete with each other. It's more like, you know, each country is trying to strengthen its position in different regions. You know, so Russia, similar to China, you know, in Russia they don't produce enough vaccines for their own population, but they keep giving this kind of offering these gifts to other countries because that's you know where they feel they have an advantage, right? And can kind of generate better reputation. So they don't do it kind of against each other, but they do offer the vaccines, and as of now, Russia has an advantage in a sense that well, Central Asian countries want the Russian vaccine. We made agreements with Russia in Kazakhstan. In Karaganda, we started producing the Russian vaccine. Well, there is more trust for Russian vaccine, although it's not like. At the same time, many people are skeptical because, you know, Russia didn't do all the procedures properly for, you know, kind of certifying these vaccines as we know. So and plus the conspiracy theories are quite widespread as well. And they also come from Russia because Russia launched this big campaign, pushing conspiracy theories, and you know, first that COVID is a hoax, and then that, you know, these vaccines, they are, you know, like Gates related or something else, or they are part of the US biological warfare, you know. So it's very confusing environment for Central Asians, information-wise as well. So it's kind of the some people want the vaccine, others don't want the vaccine. Or they want the vaccine, they're waiting for Pfizer, you know. And also the kind of the government is not governments are not terribly effective, and it's a bit of a mess. But I think we see a bit of a mess in many parts of the world now with the vaccination processes.
Great. So wanted to slightly change course a little bit. You know, so there's a new administration in Washington as of just a few months. Just the other day, President Biden, you know, talked about his desire to kind of build an American alternative to the Belt and Road, and it seems as though there's some acknowledgement within Washington that perhaps you know, there's been some retreat in terms of infrastructure development and working with allies and building the kind of infrastructure that China has been so aggressively doing through its Belt and Road Initiative. So, you know, is there a chance for an American alternative, a Western-led alternative to the Belt and Road? What do you think, John?
So I think it's a really important recognition that if you do want to compete, and you know, the Biden-Harris administration plans on competing, that you need to be offering alternatives. And you know, it sounds like a really simple observation, but I mean, incredibly important, because I think we see along the Belt and Road sometimes the worst case outcomes are countries who just didn't have an alternative. And so I think we also have, we don't need to do this from scratch necessarily. And what, you know, the US and its partners and allies offer need not be the exact same thing that China is offering. You know, we're going to bring different strengths to the table in terms of you know, sectors and different competencies, but some of the building blocks are there. So you had you know, the Blue Dot Network is something that was set up about a year and a half ago, and it includes the United States, Japan, and Australia. The basic idea is for them to certify projects that meet a certain quality threshold. giving it the blue dot stamp of approval. They've been working to operationalize that. I'm hopeful that some version of that will go forward. And I think that there's actually an opportunity to expand that group to include partners from Europe, because I think one of the stumbling blocks under the previous administration had been that European partners, prospective members of that blue dot network were hesitant to join because they didn't see alignment on environmental standards. And I think there's a lot more alignment now between this new administration and European partners and environmental standards. So I think there's a real opportunity there. I also think that the increased cooperation we're seeing with the Quad, so the United States, Japan, Australia, and India, could be expanded to also touch infrastructure. And India could be a really important partner in that set of efforts. And so I think that the building blocks are there. I think the insight is right. There's a lot to do domestically in the meantime. But I think working with partners and allies, I think you can move both things at once.
James, any thoughts on whether or not there's a chance for an American version of, or a Western-led version of a Belt and Road initiative of sorts that would sort of pose a challenge to what Beijing has spent the last 8 years setting up?
I think in general, these, including US and some European countries, and together with Canada or Australia, all these rich countries, I think, putting together some kind of resources to do something ground. This is definitely possible. But on the other hand, if we look at the individual project, like I think Nargis probably even more familiar with the railway, Euro-Asia land bridge. This kind of operation is not only involve the central government of China, it has a lot to do with the city government. So from the very beginning, like 2011, why this land bridge became possible from the very beginning, I think because of a huge amount of subsidy from local government. Still now, the trains had a lot of percentage of increase last year and the year before, particularly last year, because there's some kind of lockdown of the ports. So a lot of medical stuff sent from China by railway to European countries. So but every single 40-foot long containers has 60% of the price subsidized by local government. And that means that for the past almost 10 years now, the subsidy total is huge. And this is not something the US government was able to manage. And then, of course, the problem is that, the different impact is that within the country, like in China or in the US, the game is very different. Why the local government have the subsidy to do that? Because they, for example, Chongqing, when they subsidize and then they attract Foxconn, the company making iPhones, and many other company, the suppliers of this company, they all went to the same city. So suddenly there's a lot of job opportunities created, and then a lot of tax local government got to subsidize in that way, using that money to subsidize the trains. So this is a very unusual kind of economic operation, or it's across the different sectors to subsidize, different sectors while the government, the local government. This is a very, very unusual operation that you don't see it in other part of the world. So this is I don't think this is something that can be repeated by the US, no matter it's an old regime or new administration. But on the other hand, I'm pretty sure that US, if the government wants to do something that at that level, like a Belt and Road initiative, I think it definitely can go ahead, but in a quite different way.
So we're running out of time, and I would be remiss if I did not uphold my duty to ask you all for a book recommendation, which is what we ask for all of our guests here on our Zoom talks at the FCC. So Nargis, starting with you, what book are you reading right now, or what would you recommend?
Well, if China related, recently I read a book by Wang Gongwu, China Reconnects, joining a deep-rooted path to a new world order. And I found it pretty fascinating. It's not the newest book. I think it came out in 2019, but it's really excellent.
John, your book of choice at the moment, or a recommendation that you would have?
So I'm taking a break from serious reading, or at least nonfiction reading, and so let me recommend A Swim in the Pond in the Rain, long title, but by George Saunders, really one of my favorite authors. And it's kind of like, you know, if you can't take 2 years off and get admitted to his creative writing class, I think reading this book is the next best thing. So I'm enjoying that. I think we can all learn from it, even if we're not all aspiring novelists. And then the other thing I'm reading and enjoying is 2034, which is this novel by Elliot Ackerman and James Stavridis, both who have military backgrounds, and so it's made, I think, more compelling by their knowledge of military and technology and geopolitics. But it imagines a future war that starts in the South China Sea and goes global, and so hopefully that's not the future we're headed toward, but it's an entertaining read.
You're the second person to recommend the George Saunders book to me in the last week, I think. So I have to check it out. James, your book recommendations?
I just got a Chinese translation of this book. I don't know. You cannot see. Never mind. It's 21 Lessons for the 21st Century from Harari, the historian from Israel. I think this, the English version published in 2018, and this Chinese version from Taiwan just published a few months ago. So I like this very much because they're very inspiring. So to, I don't see other people to see this world from that very, very top angle, to see everything from very high level, to see things. At the same time, it provides a lot of visions that otherwise you don't find it. And he was no longer talking about like the brief history of humankind, but it's about the future, about our visions, about our own problems facing every day, every single day. I think I like that kind of a book.
Great. Well, we'll have to wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening, Jonathan Hillman, James Wang, and Nargis Kassenova. It's been a pleasure to speak with all of you, and thanks as well to our audience members for the great questions. Thank you again, and hope to see you sometime here at the club in person when that is possible. James Wang, you are
easier for me.
Invited to the club yourself. Easy for you. Okay, great. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great evening to you, James, and a great day, Nargis and John.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan.
Thanks.